We had this office to represent protesters in the Democratic National Convention, and we thought, well, we could just keep on doing this kind of work. It seemed like then there would be protests all the time. I got in touch with Jeff Haas. I think he was the one that knew Skip and Don, so we started having meetings in the fall of '68. And I met Fred and Bobby Rush.
We had experienced a police raid. This was in June, I believe, of 1969. We needed legal help.
I said, you know, if we do this and start an office, we can have the Black Panther Party for our clients. So everybody said, let's do it. And then we said, well, we have to get a place, and we found this place.
We had more than a lawyer-client relationship. It was a comrade relationship, family kind of relationship.
There was something in the nature of the original commitment to support the people's movements, which meant to relate to their politics. In those days, you really thought about the movement as representing the people. The Panthers were big on the people. Their slogan was all power to the people. So we said, well, it should be the People's Law Office. And it's still called that, right?
Yes, it is.
People talk about community law, they talk about community lawyers, but it's really being embedded in a reality and how you're part of the transformation of those realities.
You are really people's lawyers, and we learned very early on exactly what it means. What it means is that you all are organizers and activists yourselves.
I think we have an understanding of the system that we live in that's maybe different from other people's understandings of what the state is and what state power is, and that you fight it in a way that doesn't respect it, in a way that honors your clients, that looks for a level of accountability that really, frankly, illegitimizes state power.
Even if it's a small part, what we do in the office, it's part of the whole that makes an impactful force.
If anybody had anything to say about the PLO, it would be that we mean what we say and we say what we do, and that it's always all power to the people.
Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people. And we're gonna have to put it back in the hands of the people. And we're gonna have to do more than talk. We're gonna have to do more than listen. We're gonna even have to do more than learn. We're gonna have to start practicing, and that's very hard. We got to start getting out there with the people.
The Black Panther Party was an organization of young people who were willing to put their lives on the line for the advancement of African American poor people, black people, oppressed people in this nation, this city, and around the world.
In the fall of 1969, Fred Hampton was released from prison on an appeal bond. As a law student, I had worked with others in the office to obtain his release from the Illinois Supreme Court pending his appeal. And when he came out of prison, he picked up right where he left off, and he caught the attention not only of the police, not only of the prosecutor, Edward Hanrahan here in Chicago, but also of the FBI, who secretly was plotting to destroy the Black Panther Party under the COINTELPRO program.
When you leave here, you're saying the last words, before you go to bed tonight, say, I am a revolutionary. Make that the last word. In case you don't wake up, then somebody might believe it, and you might end up in what they call a revolutionary happy hunting grounds. Say that. I am a revolutionary.
After I met him, after he spoke at our law school, it was within a month or two that I was standing in his blood.
I remember the morning that Fred was killed. The first call that I made was to the People's Law Office. They were in the apartment. As soon as the police vacated the apartment.
And for the next 10 days, we spent that time in the apartment taking evidence to show that, in fact, the story that the police were telling was a bold-faced lie and that it was not a shootout, but rather it was a shoot-in and ultimately a murder. We can draw a straight line from that morning on December 4th, 1969, through the 13 years of legal struggle and political struggle that we all participated in with regard to the fight to bring the truth out and to change the narrative about the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. On that straight line going through all of our work in one way or another, it really solidified our understanding of what the police would do and what the police had done.
We also got involved with a shootout between the Carbondale police and the Panthers. There was a Panther group of students and others that formed a cadre in southern Illinois. The police claimed that they followed somebody to a house and they surrounded the house. And for several hours there was a shootout. They were charged with 47 counts of attempt murder. And the jury, after hearing all the evidence, acquitted all the Panthers, saying they acted in self-defense. And that was a huge victory.
Governor Nelson Rockefeller is charged that rebellious inmates forced the confrontation today in which 9 hostages and 28 prisoners were killed. Rockefeller blamed the 4-day uprising at the prison on what he called highly organized revolutionary tactics of militants.
We have set forth demands that will bring us closer to the reality of the demise of these prison institutions that serve no useful purpose to the people of America, but to those who would enslave and exploit the people of America.
The helicopter came and dropped the CS gas, and at the exact moment that that gas was dropped, they started to shoot. Exactly at that moment, and they cleared the catwalks. They just murdered everybody on the catwalk.
Because what is happening in these institutions is the most cruel and inhuman punishment and treatment that any person can be exposed to.
And we started talking about going there to help and being part of whatever legal effort there would be on behalf of the prisoners.
I realized that these brothers had no option but to continue to struggle, and if they were going to struggle, then I would have to make that same type of commitment. And they became, inspirations for us and really solidified my political ideology and my political beliefs. We were able to get a verdict in a trial in Buffalo. It was very difficult. We had an all-white jury, and then finally we were able to settle the case for $13 million for the people who were killed and injured. As a result of all the political organizing and the legal organizing, all the brothers were given amnesty.
The attorney sort of elitism does exist in spaces around the office, but I don't feel like that exudes the office.
We are not a big corporate law firm office. Just a true honor to be a part of facilitating just the communication piece of it. I'm in my interview. Damn, I was like in a row there too.
When I got to the PLO, everybody was just kind of like relaxed, and it almost felt like you were at home, but the work was still being done.
People organizing against the oppressive powers of the state and like US imperialism, be like, yeah, like this shit is fucked up. And then to be in an environment that you like don't have to hide that, or you don't have to like stifle that, is really like awesome in a way.
The work with the Panthers and the work around prisons, Attica, Marion, was like the foundation of our office. We opened up an office in Carbondale called the PLO South. And while we were there, We met some people who had some relatives in Marion Prison, the high security prison that was open when Alcatraz closed. And we got involved with working with the people inside. A lot of political people, Leonard Peltier, one of the Native American leaders, Rafael Cancel Miranda, one of the Puerto Rican nationalists.
The relationship was forged on a very, very crucial moment when mostly the Puerto Rican community in Chicago didn't have that much communication with 5 Puerto Rican political prisoners.
Because of the relationship that developed, Rafael's family would stay in Chicago, live with us, and then we were able to take him down to Marion, Illinois.
After the release of the Nationalists in 1979, and we celebrated that victory, about 6 months later, I was arrested with a group of others and accused of being members of the Armed Forces for National Liberation. And obviously, Michael Deutsch in the People's Law Office became our legal consultants.
Michael called me and said he needed me to go do some prison visits with some of the folks who were in prisons near where I was working. And I met Carlos Alberto Torres and Luis Rosa.
When Jan appeared, we could sense she was a little nervous, but we were also a little reluctant because we did not want the whole thing to be attacked from a legal perspective, because we did not recognize the legal jurisdiction of the U.S. court systems over our claim for national liberation. But immediately we grew attached to her, and then I think her to us.
So I became involved very quickly in advocating for their human rights and in communicating with both the prison administration and the family and the community about how they were doing. You know, there are people who are in prison who were at risk because of who they were politically. And, you know, you just have to think, well, these are people who have given their lives for the freedom of their country. So you do it.
One of the things that really, really was great during all those years was how the campaign kept on changing and getting stronger and stronger. And even in prison, I could feel the difference. You know, I could sense the difference with the people.
You add up the successes, getting William Morales political asylum, the incredible campaign that we did around grand jury repression to get the U.S. Navy out of Vieques, and the campaign to free the Puerto Rican political prisoners, and the success of that from 1979 to 1999, then obviously to the release of Carlos in 2010 and Oscar in 2017.
I have struggled against colonialism because colonialism is a crime against humanity.
I would say that at every one of those success, the People's Law Office has to be given a great deal of credit and recognition.
The whole reason I want to go to law school is because my father was an undocumented immigrant who was detained by ICE. And so I just wanted to give the opportunities to people for help. If we didn't have the means to have an attorney, we don't really know what would have happened to him. But having seen this work with like police brutality, wrongful arrests and convictions, and political prisoner work has really broadened the sense of what I would want to see changed in the world.
And behind me over here is the old Area 2 Detective Headquarters. Police torture was concentrated at Area 2. It was led by then Commander John Burge. We really started getting involved when it was Andrew Wilson. When I took on Andrew's case, I thought, oh, how could we lose this case? The guy's got so many injuries. And yet I significantly underestimated the difficulty of litigating against a police department that is involved in these kind of activities. We broadened it out from Andrew Wilson to make it a Chicago Police Department policy case. There was a lot of community pressure brought, a lot of pressure brought to fire Burge, and eventually he was fired. There eventually was a move to prosecute Burge for lying about the torture. And in fact, he was convicted and he served several years in federal prison.
I've had the honor and privilege to work on the Burge torture cases, both as a lawyer and as an activist. We continue to represent Burge torture survivors who continue to remain behind bars, who've never received an evidentiary hearing to challenge the use of their tortured confessions against them. Over time, it became very clear to me that the legal system, particularly the courts, had failed the torture survivors and their family members and Black communities here in Chicago time and time again. When did you first learn about the People's Law Office?
It came about, I say around 83, but I really didn't talk to the guy that was representing them because I didn't trust him. And so you have to understand, when I got arrested, I was telling people what had happened to me. They failed to move on it or say anything about it. I just shut up, because then nobody believed me.
And it was through Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, being really spurred on and inspired by Stan Willis and Black People Against Police Torture, that we were able to mount a campaign for reparations for the Burge torture survivors. With Miriam Kaba of Project NIA, along with We Charge Genocide and Amnesty International.
It was really exciting. It brought together people from different strands of organizing in a way where everyone was, honored for their differences. There were multiple actions. Train takeovers were done in such a beautifully creative way. People were holding teachings that we didn't know of, and that was great. I mean, that was the dream, and it was actually coming into fruition.
And we were able to get reparations for the Burge torture survivors, passing historic reparations legislation in Chicago City Council in May of 2015.
But the reparation come about, that was even more beautiful, because that showed the people would bleed us and was trying to help us now. We had people behind us that stood up for us, that was helping us all the way, when all the time we ain't never had that before.
The office has both supported and afforded us the ability so that we could go beyond what the courts could not provide us. And we could work hand in hand with the torture survivors, with organizers, to seek this redress, this change, that no verdict or no conviction truly can.
We still here, we still standing. We can speak on what happened to us. And that's why the memorial is so important to us, because it shows the things they used against us, it shows what they did to us, and it also shows that we still here. And we can speak on what happened to us. It'll always be in history now that we survived and we told the truth. We're gonna keep on pushing hard as we can until we get everything we need. That's how I see it.
The police became excessively violent in shoving matches and used mounted police to physically intimidate and injure at least 2 demonstrators.
In the 80s, when I first came to the office, the office's commitment to working with people and their movements for justice and liberation really led us to demonstrating our commitment by representing activists. And so being at demonstrations and supporting our clients and representing individuals who engaged in civil disobedience or direct action.
During all of the 80s, our organizations worked with PLO in relation to Central America activist work. So we were part of the people who were sitting in congressional offices. We're trying to support the Central American refugees that were coming through. We were part of the core team of people that developed the sanctuary movement. We were often finding ourselves in need of legal support. For us to have the PLO and to have the individual lawyers in it, understanding liberation struggles in other countries, both things from the Black liberation movement here in Chicago and in the U.S. and Puerto Rico. I mean, those interlapping and understanding of the Central American movement as well were really important. Lawyers don't lead the way just because it's a legal struggle. Lawyers play into and support what other people are doing in their struggle for liberation. So that was, a great opportunity to work with them and to know that they understood that.
Inspiring groups that I've had the honor and privilege to represent are activists from a disability rights organization called ADAPT. We've represented them since the late 80s when they were fighting to get wheelchair accessible buses. In the 90s, the AIDS activist group ACT UP.
We are people that are living with AIDS. We are here to demand health care, and all you can do is send your horses.
In the late 90s and into the 2000s, the Immigrant Youth Justice League. You have a legal hat and you have an activist hat, and the activist world is quite different than the confining legal world, and it means to me to try and translate those two worlds to each other.
I've had the opportunity to represent several queer and transgender folks who've been violated by the police, and particularly those who've been in prison. Although I am not working at a gay office or in a gay legal non-for-profit, it's very important to me to be able to be in community and to help work alongside queer and trans communities, particularly those of us who are criminalized, which is predominantly people of color. But we really want to highlight and expose all this racist, homophobic, transphobic violence as well, and so that we can fully represent people with all of their experiences and really name and shame the state for this violence that's occurring.
So on March 20th, 2003, after the US declared war on Iraq, there were massive protests here in Chicago and in cities across the country and across the world. Over 10,000 people taking to the streets, marching up Lakeshore Drive, marching down Chicago Avenue. The march was intending to go further south, down Michigan Avenue, going through the heart of Commercial District here. To prevent the protesters from doing that, the police blocked off the street. There was a bound area where everybody was blocked in and no one was able to leave for over 90 minutes. There were over 800 people who were in that bounded area being penned in by police for no justifiable reason, no lawful reason. A number of us arrested violently, beaten, handcuffs too tight, struck by police. Over 500 of those people were arrested and taken into custody. Hundreds were taken to court and they had to face unlawful charges. The police made these mass boilerplate allegations, couldn't identify what any specific person did. The National Lawyers Guild organized lawyers to represent those people in court who were actually facing those charges. Once all those criminal charges were beat, lawyers from People's Law Office, along with other lawyers from National Lawyers Guild, Melinda Power and Jim Fennerty, filed a class action lawsuit. And that litigation that was filed in 2003 went on for 10 years.
The case ultimately settled for $6.2 million. And on top of that, we got attorney's fees totaling $11 million that the city had to pay out.
So that settlement not only held the city accountable and really showed them they would really have to be penalized if the Chicago police were to continue to make unlawful arrests of protesters en masse like that again. That's created opportunities for more protests, more movements since that time to be able to take to the streets without that fear of being mass arrested like that.
We are at Jackson and LaSalle, which was the home base for Occupy Chicago from September of 2011 through November of that year. A movement of the 99% against the 1%, the financial elites in this country that really run the show. From the moment that we began occupying the space here at Jackson and LaSalle, we knew that there were plans to host the G8 and NATO summits in May of 2012. So ultimately, regardless of what happened with Occupy, we knew that the actions we were taking were helping build up this energy towards this global event that was going to happen in Chicago that spring. Many of the organizers at Occupy Chicago were not actually organizers. Most of us had never done any of this before, didn't really know our rights or what we could get away with, and it was through those conversations with the radical legal community that we got the information that we needed to know where we could actually push things further.
Last Wednesday night at around 11:30 at night, the Chicago police executed a midnight raid on a house in the Bridgeport area near South Side in Chicago. In one of those apartments, they arrested 9 people.
And this is exactly what we anticipate from law enforcement and from various levels of government before national special security events.
So there were 5 people altogether that ended up facing terrorism charges for actions that were orchestrated by the Chicago Police Department.
We are not only going to be ready, we're going to be more ready than any other city in the country, as per the people who do that training have told us.
They had already not only infiltrated Occupy Chicago, they were also targeting the mental health movement, who were fighting to keep 6 of Chicago's 12 mental health clinics open that were only costing the city $2.2 million a year to run. It was legitimately scary to come into downtown Chicago and see streets that like right now are packed, totally vacant of the people that like make the city a beautiful place to live in. And in their place, these militarized police officers with shields and armor.
We know of over 100 arrests that happened throughout this week, and the National Lawyers Guild stands ready to represent all of them. And we appear in court for the NATO 3 this morning and for the other 2 tomorrow.
Having attorneys that had been around organizing in Chicago for decades were literally defending the movements that inspired us to take action, to know that those same individuals were on the situation that was unfolding in front of us was like a huge sigh of relief.
Israel is a racist state! 3579, free Palestine!
A number of us were raided by the FBI in September of 2010. Ultimately, 23 people were subpoenaed to a federal grand jury. We all refused to testify against our friends and colleagues and even people in Palestine that we knew they were going to ask us about. 3 years after those raids, you know, Rasmia's name was listed on some of the search warrants and some of the subpoenas. With the U.S. working directly with the Israeli government, we found out later on that it was all looking at work around Palestine.
Well, what was most significant for me, both in the Mohammed Salah case and in Rasmia's case, was the organizing that was done around those cases.
I remember discussing the case with a number of other attorneys before you came to us and we came to you about this, who are considered top flight defense attorneys in the city and are, you know, bastions of liberal thought. We're like, oh, this isn't even a political case. You all made it clear that yes, absolutely it's about Palestine and Israel, and absolutely that you all as community organizers who are working on the defense committee should project that as much as possible.
And we should figure out a way using, you know, the limitations of the law to project the political underlying issues in the case.
We put Israel on trial in a federal courthouse in the United States, like in the same way that you did with the Mohammed Salah case and the Abd al-Halim al-Ashqar case. We built an incredible coalition, a large, diverse coalition with, you know, Angela Davis coming into town twice to speak on Rasmia's behalf, and Frank Chapman and the Chicago Alliance, the main police accountability organization in Chicago, mobilizing the Arab Women's Committee, Rasmia's crew.
That courtroom was filled every day. They had to have an overflow courtroom. The organizing was so successful that they went after the organizers. They were accusing you of fomenting some kind of interference with the judicial system, and they were freaked out.
Clearly, we wanted her to stay and we would love her if she was here, but all of that was able to do what we wanted, what Rasmia wanted, and what you all wanted, which was to educate the public as well. It was a resounding success for that reason, you know.
We have rights that no one can ever take away from us. The rights of the oppressed are like the sun. They cannot be covered with screen.
The Patriot Act, or, you know, today's clear anti-Palestinian policies on all levels. All the anti-BDS bills that they're trying to pass, it makes it really important that we continue to talk and strategize and work together.
To get to 50 years is not an easy thing, because I remember when I turned 50. And I hope that the law office continues this journey, steadfast what they set out to do.
You know, the office has new young people and people who are kind of a generation younger than us.
People who weren't even born when we started.
Yeah, there are people who aren't 50. And they're committed, and I think the future is good. We think we'll continue for at least another 50 years.
That's right. Even though several of us won't be around to see it.
Yeah.
I think our role is to support the young people as they shape the future of the office. No one directed us in our path. I have every faith in their ability to carry on in the way that they and the movements that they are going to be working with decide is necessary.
So it's been life-changing to represent the Move 9, and I'm looking forward to being able to continue the fight for the remaining 2 who are in prison, and to see the day that all the surviving Move 9 members are out of prison and able to be with their loved ones, their families, and to continue their struggle for justice.
They're just adjusting to the current events and the times as are needed. So that's what I always have seen PLO do, and I see them doing in the future.
Continue to put forward the narrative, the people's narrative, so that the movements that are fighting on the front lines today, they not only have their own voices to talk about their truths as to what is happening now, but they can use the truths of what has happened before.
I think really what our job is to expose what these practices and policies are and to unearth as much information as possible so that the organizers can really go in and seek the most monumental change.
It always brings you to a medium of understanding that this work has to continue for the survival of us all. Those who believe in freedom cannot rest.